The easiest to look at things on a sine or cosine graph are amplitude and midline. So here's this function notation again, f of x equals a times sine of omega x minus c plus k. So the outside transformations are the easiest to understand because they work exactly the way you'd expect, although it's a little specific for a sine graph. A is the amplitude, and I thought that needed a couple exclamation points. It just seems like that kind of morning. That is the vertical stretch or compression. A is going to be the distance from the midline to the max or from the midline to the min. K is the midline, which is your vertical shift up or down. So if K is plus 2, it's shifted up 2. If it's minus 2, it's down 2. That's exactly how that works. So the amplitude is this distance from the midline to the top or the midline to the bottom. There are some formulas you can look at for that, where A is the max minus the min over the 2, if that's all you have. That's half the total vertical on the graph. So here's all the vertical distance from the max to the min. So half of that total distance is the amplitude, because the amplitude extends up and down from the midline. The midline is the max plus the min over the 2 because it's the average of the 2. But instead of trying to memorize formulas, because you see these are similar, try to make sense of it. Half the total vertical is the amplitude, and the average of the max and min is the midline, just right between whatever the y values for the max and the min are here. Let's look at those in Desmos. The standard graph would just be sine of x, which would have an amplitude of 1 and a vertical shift of 0. And here I've drawn in, with these other little commands here, total amplitude going from the midline to the maximum. And you can see when I change the amplitude, this distance here increases. When I raise the midline up or down, the amplitude is still 2.7. You can see that purple distance only changes when I do this. You can also add in the midline if you want to. Whoops. Right like that. If you want to, you can go to the settings, change this to a dotted line or a dashed line like that. You can change the color. How about black? No, orange. You can see the midline goes up and down with this toggle. The amplitude is the distance there. This is the distance from the midline to the minimum. You can see how that works. Let's do an example. Example 1, we'll use this graph in a couple different things, but example 1 is find the amplitude and the midline. So on this graph, you can see that the max equals 9. You can assume that anything that looks like it's right between 8 and 10 is probably 9. Similarly, down here, we can see that the minimum is going to be 3. Well, minus 3. Then the midline is going to be what's right between them. So here is our midline. The equation for the midline is just y equals k because it's a horizontal line. So whatever k is. And I had these points here so you can kind of see the midline looks like it's 3, but you could calculate that if you want to. You could say k equals 9 plus negative 3 over 2. K equals 6 over 2. K equals 3. And similarly, you could say the amplitude is equal to the max minus the min. So 9 minus negative 3 all over 2, amplitude equals 6. But that's not terribly surprising because this distance here is the amplitude. When you go from 3 to 9, you get 6, or this here, if you go from 3 to negative 3, you also get 6.